Hey everybody, welcome to another Friday Night Movies, but it's on a Monday. Why? Because it is Halloween in July, the 31st, and we are talking about Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. Ooh, spooky. I'm Matt, and I'm here along with...
And I'm John.
Yeah, John. So, today we're talking about Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and this is very interesting because, I'm 29 years old. John, how old are you, if you could just tell the listening audience?
I am 38.
You're 38. And when it comes to Elvira, well, specifically this movie came out in 1988. So it's before my time, not before your time, but I imagine you would have not seen this as a child.
No, this was a teenage, 4-year-old John, as legendary as my constant libido and constant thirst are. I was not a. It wasn't until I was, a young adolescent lad that I really saw this movie and came to appreciate Elvira.
The fact that you use the word legendary, you're like, yeah, no, man, it's legendary. There's there's scriptures written about my libido. I just love I I don't know why. Maybe because I saw the book of the spells in this one. It makes me think of like the Necronomicon, and it just makes me think of like yeah no like there's just the book that's just like oh the libido.
It's just been passed down from generation to generation.
Jesus Christ. Okay, so that's a way to open up a podcast. The point is that to be fair, honestly, we're doing the character of Elvira justice, talking about libidos. What else are we going to talk about? Flowers in the sky. So when it comes to the character of Elvira, though, my point is that arguably she was before our time in terms of in terms of popularity, in terms of peak pop culture relevance, and yet the character perseveres, I think, because of how relatable she is, especially with this film. Obviously, yes, her look doesn't detract, right? But at the same time, though, the way she acts, I feel like it's extremely relatable. The way they, of course, they juxtaposed her with a community that's just very religious. Of course, it's going to make for some comedy, but at the same time, though, I feel like not only this movie, but even just the character in general, has really stayed strong. And I think this might have been true for you as well. I was telling you this before we started recording. The VH1 I Love the 80s and I Love the 90s and stuff like that, they had her as a recurring character. And I think that's how I found out about her. Do you feel the same way? Because I don't know how else you would have found out about her outside of this film, right?
So yeah, this film was actually my introduction to her, and actually, I think the first time that I had seen it was on comedy. It was on Comedy Central
That makes sense.
one
Oh my
night.
god, maybe that also is how I found it one day. That actually
That's
would
how I
make
ended up
sense.
seeing a lot of the comedy classics, especially from like the 80s and 90s. Was that in like the late 80s, or I'm sorry, the late 90s, early 2000s, that they would run them on Comedy Central, late at night, and that's how I picked up this one. I was like, oh, she's spooky, but she's also sexy and also funny. Like, tell me more.
While I wouldn't call this movie, and I'm not talking about this one, just the one I'm about to mention, a classic, I also remember constantly seeing Joe Dirt on Comedy Central. Remember Joe Dirt?
Oh yeah,
Jesus
that's a
Christ.
very underrated David Spade vehicle.
Yeah, well, I think it was appropriately rated.
Yeah,
But it doesn't mean that it was. Well, it's funny. I have to go back to it because I haven't seen it
yeah.
since I was
To
like a
tell you the truth,
teenager.
I'm talking smack. I've
Um,
never actually seen it.
oh damn it! No, it was definitely rated well. Don't you worry. And when I say well, I mean accurately.
It received the appropriate amount of
Yes,
accolades and attention for what it
which is
was.
probably none. But I have to say this movie, I was confused because apparently, and the actress who plays Elvira, this isn't like pro wrestling. We can actually talk about who she really is. Because usually in pro wrestling, it's kind of it isn't right to be like, oh yeah, this person's real name is. You normally use,
Well,
but
she
in this
doesn't really
case,
make a secret of it. It's a character, It's
yeah.
it's Cassandra Peterson, who actually, as I understand it, part of what led her to have this bit and this character was that I know that she had suffered an injury when she was a child
Oh,
with boiling water, and then I said she would have roles with a lot of makeup and things like that. I'm completely probably butchering the story, but I know that had a role in her. Also, funnily enough, one thing that I may have seen her in before I saw her in this was in Star Trek 4, aka the one with the whales. There was a woman in 1986 that she's like a secretary, and she pops her head in this guy's office, and then the guy's like, "Not now, Madeline," and Madeline was Cassandra Peterson out of makeup as Elvira, but I didn't recognize her, for that very reason.
What was the movie called?
Star Trek. It was Star Trek for the Voyage Home, but everybody calls it the one with the whales.
I don't think that was her. I'm seeing nothing of that on her filmography at all.
It was, as I said, it was a literal like a walk on one
Oh,
line
maybe.
bit thing.
Okay.
So if she's on the credits, it's probably more toward the end. But I remember being like, oh wow, she was in that too. But yeah, this really, this was really this movie was what put her on the map for me. I hadn't really seen any of her TV spots and things like that, or like her beer. She did like I think the beer ads in the '80s as well.
So
But
here's the thing for me, right? I definitely would have seen her, and this is where she would have appeared, at least from the very little that I had seen at the time of things that weren't appropriate for me. So like, because at this point I'm looking at it's 2004, so I'm 12. She was in the I Love the '80s stuff, which I shouldn't have been seeing at the time, yet I did. She had an E True Hollywood story made of her, or at least an episode of it, Scream Queens. I probably saw advertising for that as well. And she also was I ended up having a WrestleMania box set around maybe 2004, 2003, 2004. And WrestleMania box set, John, had every single WrestleMania from the first one to the latest one at the time on DVD.
oh
So
wow,
she was actually at WrestleMania 2. She was a guest announcer.
which
I
was in the '80s, I think too, right?
uh yes, yes, of course. This was 86. So of course again, peak popularity, she's doing her thing. Oh, she was also Biker Mama in Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
uh-huh.
So I don't know if you're a fan of the Pee-wee Herman. He's had more than one movie, I think, right?
Yeah, well, there's Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and then I think there was like one other.
Oh, okay. So then that big one. I think I had Pee-wee's Big Adventure on VHS tape actually, so that would make
That's
sense.
the main one that everyone. That's one where he was dancing in the dancing in the bar and stuff like that.
Interesting. But the point is that talking about this film and the fact that she actually received a Razzie Award for it, or sorry, a Razzie Award nomination, and then she made a joke because it was for Worst Actress in 1989, and she lost, and she ended up saying, "I even lost the Worst Actress." Now that's sad.
Oh jeez, who did she
Uh,
lose to?
Liza Minnelli for Arthur 2 on the Rocks.
Oh man,
Yeah, I don't know. I've never.
that's like just two gay icons
Yes,
duking it out.
I was
Liza
gonna say
Minnelli
yeah,
and Elvira.
yeah, just duking it out. And for Rent a Cop. So it's Arthur 2 on the Rocks and Rent a Cop. So did Liza Minnelli get nominated twice, I guess? I don't know. But yeah, the thing is that it's weird because I didn't consider her a bad actress in this. I just feel like it was like she was just out of place and she was just being snarky. Like you could maybe say that she wasn't acting, she was just one note and that note was snarky. But I feel like I don't know, like I feel like if someone says, "Well, that doesn't seem like what a normal person would do in that situation." I'm like, "Of course it isn't. That's Elvira." Like
Yeah,
the point is that she is an exaggerated cartoon character.
yeah. It was odd. It was odd that she had gotten that, like, because, and I know it's kind of a different matter if you're comparing, say, like a comedic role like this to something more like dramatic and intense. I don't think her acting was bad. I mean,
And
and really the thing with me is that I think that she did a good job because the the humor, like I said, the humor was on point, and like the her delivery and her wit was very good. So I think for what she set out to do in the movie, because it was a comedy, I think she did a good job.
and don't get me wrong, I can take a crack at the movie. The movie had issues. But I don't think that it was her, like her acting specifically, that had the issues. And by the way, like I know it's a comedy movie, but I think that one of the things, though, just looking at the way the film was structured, they took way too long to introduce the fact that the bad guy was actually like Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, more or less, or like a guy essentially equivalent,
I mean, he was
equivalent to that
British,
sort of.
so I was like, "Ooh," I feels like because I don't know, it felt like he was very much like meant to be like Mr. Crowley, essentially like a amalgam. But like my thing is the reason why like it threw me off is because I knew obviously he's a bad guy, right? But the way they're setting up the film, and you can argue, but Matt, it's supposed to be a twist, but then he also disappears a lot. Like he could have been cut out of the movie as being like Satan, and yeah, the ending would have like there wouldn't have been an ending, obviously, because like he was obviously the evil big bad that she had to fight at the end, destroy the house, etc., etc. And of course, because of his death, she then gets his money, which is fucking
Yeah.
hilarious.
Well,
But
it was one part supernatural. Like it was a fish out of water, like Footloose type small town
which I
thing,
like, which I
and which
thought
was
was
cool.
great.
And then also alongside that was the overarching like mystical magic plot there, which kind of the mystical plot kind of took a backseat to the town story, because I think that was really the important part about it was her relationship to the kids in the town and the parents' dislike of her. So that the point
And
that the magic part almost took like a backseat to
yeah,
that.
not even a backseat. It was in the trunk.
Yeah, it was sort
That's
of just a bookend to it,
yeah.
and really the magical duel was really just a way to get rid of the bad guy and get and get the inheritance. So that really was it.
That's the thing. Like and again, not gonna sit here and be like the movie was awful, but like it was not a perfect film. I think
No,
that
and it also wasn't a terribly deep film. I mean, it was kind of a
no,
by the numbers, like I said, like uptight, like person comes and shakes up an uptight conservative
I will say though,
community.
can you imagine if Footloose ended with being like, like nobody puts baby in a corner. We're gonna burn you at the stake, Patrick Swayze.
Is I'm going to
Could you
vaporize you with with magical blasts.
I could you imagine if like every movie like that where it's just like, hey, listen, all right, I don't think you understand. I can help change this community, and it's like, actually, we're gonna just burn you at the stake. That is where it was like, okay, this takes it to a whole other fucking level.
Yeah.
But I got to admit though, um, I do feel like a town like that would probably burn her at the stake. I'm just keeping it
Oh,
real.
absolutely. And a
Not,
matter of fact, I
I'm
mean,
talking about today,
to tell you the truth, my
2022. I mean, right now.
yeah,
I
I have trouble like a lot of, and not to take it to too bummer a place, but like I have trouble lately watching media that deals with really like puritanical conservative communities, because it was intended to be a joke that these people would
I
burn
don't
her at
think it
the
was
stake.
meant to be a joke. I don't know if it was meant to be that tongue in cheek. I know it was meant
It
to be
hits a little bit
humorous,
too
but
close to home
it
lately,
does.
like with the violence that those types of communities are capable of against people who are different.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, yes, she's different, but she isn't part of the LGBTQ plus community. The character,
As
although
far
I
as they
will,
know, I mean, she
well,
now we know better, but
well, now we know about the actress, but not the character. Although I do
right,
find it fascinating that throughout the film, there are little moments where she's looking at I forgot her name. It was the uptight character looking at her chest, and she's like, you can put in someone's eyes out with that thing. But the way
right,
she looked at the chest, I was like, longing, or is it
yeah,
just or was it just you're like you're making fun of her? And the fact, by the way, the fact that they were padded, I should have seen it coming because like they genuinely looked like they could actually hurt somebody.
yeah. Well, those were those really pointy
Yes, that's
faulties,
what I'm
you know.
saying. Like, no, legit though. Like, it should have. What should have came to me sooner? The fact that there was going to be something supernatural about this, because I don't know why it didn't strike me as that the supernatural would ever. And I guess that's the whole point. It was it was potentially a like a little twist, a little plot twisty twist, but I didn't see it coming. However, did you see the familiar stuff coming? Because the second that I saw that supernatural shit was afoot, I was like, oh, then that dog is her familiar.
Yeah, Gonk being the familiar kind of, it was telegraphed a little bit. I knew that there was going to be something, something a little bit extra with, but also this was me rewatching it for this broadcast was my, the first time in a while I've seen it, but I kind of knew that twist. But even looking back in the beginning, I was like, okay, the dog is going to be something. The
Yeah,
dog is going to be, and the fact that it was a dog who was the familiar was pretty cool, because I know usually it's a cat.
and I
I
think
know
that's a
a
great.
familiar can be really any creature, but typically in fiction, it's a especially for a witch, it's normally a cat.
Oh
So
my god,
like, there's a poodle who got a punk, giving the poodle a punk hairdo and stuff like that. I love Gonk is the MVP.
it's always a cat. I'm talking about, and maybe it's just because of the familiarity with me with the original Sabrina the Teenage Witch,
Yeah,
but it's
everyone thinks of Salem.
but yeah, no, it's always a fucking cat. So to have it be a poodle, that I didn't get it at first. It took until when when I saw spooky shit happening right with Mr. Crowley, and I was like, oh, okay, then it's clearly the dog is clearly the familiar. What I now realize though, looking back as I was talking to you about this, that really is cool because you mentioned that it was telegraphed that it was a familiar. How do you know? How is it telegraphed? Well, in a comedy, when you see the shadow of the little dog as a big dog, as a Doberman, you laugh because, oh, those two fucking idiots. These complete absolute fucking morons. They think their asshole is their mouth. They're so stupid, right? They thought that this little poodle shadow was actually a Doberman. Now looking at it, it's like, wait, actually, that dog might have transformed into a Doberman.
Right, right.
That shadow might have actually been the shadow of a Doberman that they genuinely saw and were like,
I'm gonna
holy
be a
fuck.
total I'm gonna be a total dick right now about this, but I
Okay.
think it might have been a Rottweiler. I'm not positive,
Oh, sorry, Rottweiler.
but
That's yeah. What?
point
What?
being,
Wait, hold on. What is a Doberman? Why am I confused? What
Dobermans
time
have
is
the
it?
pointier. Dobermans are a bit more lean and have the pointier ears, I think.
Right, you're correct. Yes,
Um,
Doberman. A Doberman was in. Do you remember that movie Cats and Dogs or whatever it was called, Cats versus Dogs?
yeah,
Wasn't a Doberman played by Alec Baldwin? Why the fuck is that a memory that was unlocked?
that's a core memory right there. But
That's a weird
and again, I
fucking
could,
memory.
of that I am like
No, no, no.
75%
I
sure, but
just Googled Dobermans because we had to get this information correct on this podcast. You are absolutely correct. Yes, Dobermans are leaner, meaner fighting machiners and also are voiced by Alec Baldwin.
which makes
Um,
them extra mean. That
yes,
just to drive that last bit home.
yes, makes them extra meat. But yeah, I when you look at this film again, it has its issues, but there's so much heart in it, and it really fleshes out the Elvira character in a way that like, because I think you could have easily just played this film as, wow, she's really fucking stupid, right? You know, oh, this bimbo. They didn't do that. They gave her a lot of character and a lot of heart, and she's just like, she just cares about, she genuinely cares about the community.
Yeah,
Like,
the scenes with the kids were really great, and
yeah,
like the fact, and you did genuinely get the sense like there was just a lot of fun about her. Like, yeah, she was using and she wasn't afraid to use like her wiles to get the kids to like do stuff for her and to paint and
because
to help
well,
her paint
because you know
the
what it
house.
is. It's a thing of like, it doesn't matter what age the person is. They're going to like, it's a reactionary thing, I think, and some people maybe don't realize that. Maybe they don't get objectified, they don't understand, but like in her case it's clearly like a, you know what, if they're gonna be dicks about it, might as well fucking say, hey, how about you paint my house, you know,
Yeah,
like they're
exactly.
the
And,
ones
and, and
being
she does
dicks about
genuinely
it.
like, and she does and the thing is, the reason
Yes,
it wasn't as gross as I think it could have been
well,
was
because she's
especially
not
because,
touching the kids, it's
yeah,
nothing
and
like
also
that.
and also like obviously she genuinely cared about the kids, and obviously the kids genuinely cared about her. So it was just like a fun. It was
Yes.
all very wholesome, really, really
Well,
all
that's
told for.
well, yeah. Because the thing is, it could have easily turned into a teenage fantasy film very quickly, and it could have been very creepy within, you know, with context, right? I mean, even at the time, of course, if you're an adult, that would have been weird. But like, if you're a teen at the time, you would have been like, oh, a teenage fantasy film with Elvira. But then in, you know, in context, like in passing, with as we get older, we're like, oh, I don't know about this.
And
But it
also
wasn't
too,
that at all. That's the
yeah,
interesting thing
and
about it.
plus like basically from the moment the movie begins, she's being sexually harassed by.
That is bad. Even though like it's weird because it's sadly realistic, it's something, but I think because of how real it is, it just doesn't come off as funny to me. So
No,
like,
and it wasn't really. It was only kind of played for laughs in the sense that like whoever the people that did it got their comeuppance, but it wasn't really treated as a joke that she was treated, and she didn't stand for being treated that way. But
yeah.
you could, but yeah, but so really the one of the main villain of the movie is sexual harassment.
Yes. Although I will admit, despite the fact that it was absolutely disgusting, the scene with the realtor in the house, because like they're trying to, like he's trying to get her out of the community. You actually, it would be in your best interest not to harass her, you fucking pig. But then he harasses her, so that whole scene wasn't funny until afterwards when she's on the phone with her agent. And one of the best lines of the movie, because obviously I didn't see a lot of these lines coming. I've never seen this movie before, but one of the best lines of the movie is with her on the phone with her agent, and her agent's like telling me to wait when these guys are trying to get, you know, get the money from me, and she goes, "Yeah, well today I was about 6 inches away from selling the house," and I'm like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
really.
because the thing is, a lot of people, especially nowadays, just try to be like penis size, penis size, penis size, as just the joke. The joke is small weenie. It's never the size of the weenie in question as the joke. In other words, saying I was 6 inches away to me is actually funny instead of being like, man, small weenie. Click. Because I feel like, I don't know if you've seen that, like a lot of like jokes like that in either media or whatever it might be, people online having a laugh. It's always just small weenie and nothing like that actually makes you go, oh my god, like actually have it click in your head.
Right.
Like it's just, you have small pee, laugh at man with small pee because he was rude. In this case, it was literally like a well written joke.
Yeah, they weave it into
Yeah.
there's a little bit of wit involved in it and things like that.
Yes. And her
but
character just totally having that throughout the film. I think, a line that I was telling you before, so I didn't interrupt you, but a line that I was telling you before we started the podcast that apparently a mutual friend of ours says is just used so often nowadays on RuPaul's Drag Race, when she gets hit in the head with the letter from the top of the matinee, and then the guy comes down, the love interest, and he goes, oh, I'm so sorry, how's your head? And she goes, I haven't gotten any complaints so far.
and that's such a, like, I use that in my everyday. That's become part of my everyday tool chest myself. I'm not, I'll completely cop to it. It's a brilliant one. And then the other one too, like I said, not that dick shaming is okay, but in the context of like a guy being put in his place, a sexual harasser being put in his place. Like at the one point where it's like, hey baby, I got something to show you. She's like, oh, I forgot my magnifying glass.
Oh
Like that's
yes.
like the way that she handles them is very cool. And also too, it's worth mentioning, and this is the other thing that kind of stood out to me even when I watched it back in the day, before I was really super conscious of or sensitive to such things. But this is another one, almost like the Princess and the Frog, where she gets her wish at the end, like her goal at the end of the movie. She gets it, and it doesn't really have anything to do like happily ever after with the love interest. Like the guy is just a hunky guy who supports her and like is like down for her dream and like and is like happy for her when she gets it. But like the ending up with that guy, I think his name was Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Sure, maybe.
or
Why
David.
not?
He really he's a perfectly nice gentleman. He's a totally generic love interest, but like
David
um
Bryan Muscle Guy is his
yeah,
name.
David Bryan Muscle guy. He's a hunky guy. But like the end goal, like they have a little bit of like romance and a little bit of like a sexual tease and stuff like that. But like ending up with him is not the goal. Like that's just sort of
Also, what I enjoy is even though you can tell throughout the movie he's not interested, it's not that he's not interested in Elvira or the other woman. He's just the kind of person that's like, look, I just don't. Maybe he, because of the area he's in, he just very much wants to wait till marriage, but he doesn't say it or anything like it in a way that is forceful against Elvira or like in other words, neither side to me anyway feels like they're forcing themselves on him. They're like, oh, wait a minute. At least with Elvira, she's like, wait, oh, he's not interested? Like, okay, I'm going to make the dinner, but like, she's not like ripping his clothes off. There's no like, oh, well, you've told me you are uninterested. You use the words, hey, not now. And she goes, well, yes, now. No, it's just like, hey, how about we, obviously, yes. Yeah, he was like, hey, how about we leave to get food in a public place because I feel weird. She's like, no, just make you something. Like, like obviously, like, she wants him, but there isn't like this, oh, haha, he doesn't really want it and she's going to rip his clothes off because
yeah,
that's also bad.
he's not shamed. There's no joke at his expense for like and it could just be that he's not like that fast a guy. Like he,
Well,
maybe
I
he
mean, it's the area that he lives in.
yeah,
It's very much, it's very, like you
yeah.
said, puritanical. But I love that for him personally. It's not like, let me take out the cross against this woman. Like he just,
Yeah, he just is not like it's not the speed that he's really at right
yeah.
now, and and again, it's not even that it's really a huge part of the like the romance and the flirtation between them isn't even really that huge a part of the story. It's just he's another like sympathetic person in the community and things like that. And also, as I said, we can always go back, and there's always stuff that doesn't quite
Oh
read.
no, no, no! It's a little off by today's standards, but it could have been so much worse with
Yeah,
comedies of the
and
time and how they
probably would have
were.
been in less capable hands. And also the
Yeah.
whole bit with like in the 80s and 90s, there was always if there was a group of uptight people, there was always a scene where they accidentally got high or drunk or something like that and started acting horny. And of course we had that. Unfortunately, it kind of, said there's a little non-con aspect to that. And I know that like some of the
Oh, that is
and
true. I mean, you know what it is though? I think what they did right, in my opinion, is at first, in the beginning of the scene, I was a little worried. Not, I wasn't worried at first because I didn't know it was coming. But when the teens were there, once the adults start getting mad horny for each other, I'm like, where are the teenagers? And then they never showed up in the scene. So I'm like, oh, okay, the teenagers were just like, you know what? Fuck this potluck. This sucks. Let's go smoke some weed or something. So they
yeah.
left the potluck, and then that's when all the adults got horny. Because that was a weird scene when they just a minute earlier were like, oh my god, you kids, get to the back of the line. And then within like minutes, they're all horn dogging each other.
Right.
I don't know. The thing with the spell, though, is it really a love spell or was it just making them want to do what they wanted to do? I don't know. Because they were uptight, but like, uptight isn't like in your DNA. So I
Well, they
don't
could be
know.
repressed. Yeah, it's learned
Yeah,
based, so
I
they could have
don't
just
know.
been repressed. But
Yeah.
I think in the last 5 seconds we've given far more thought to it than the writers of the movie ever
No,
did.
they just wanted to see old people being
Yeah,
horny.
it was like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if these old, like prude, uptight people like got high or got messed up and like, yeah, so that sort of thing. And there's always that kind of so that was a perennial staple in comedies, in raunchy comedies in the 80s and
You
90s.
know,
And
this is very much a raunchy teen comedy.
yeah,
Um,
for what it is, it succeeds on that point pretty well. And as a showcase for Elvira's wit and her personality, it was pretty cool and things like that. So overall, yeah, I think it's a really fun movie. It's well paced. It's got good humor. Some parts of it hold up better than others, but I think it's the sort of thing you could still watch now and still get a degree of enjoyment out of it. Not that it's like a total cringe. Like it holds up decently well.
I think it does. I think another thing as well that I find interesting at the time, I think if I had been a teenager at the time, looking at all of these movies with love interests who look like the dude that was the love interest in this film, right? I would go, really? Elvira is with that guy? That's the guy that she's interested in the context of the time. Now, however, in 2022, I actually love it. And it's interesting because some people would be like, really? Wouldn't you think it's the reverse? But here's the thing. At the time, because we were so oversaturated with dudes that look like that, the idea of it's not opposites attracting, it's, oh, of course, Elvira as a character has to be into the hunky guy, right? Can't be into some other goth dude. But now, when you have so much media putting the goth people together and being like, now, Kith, it
Yeah,
actually is an interesting dynamic to have this opposites attract situation where the guy is buff, but he doesn't mean he has to be an asshole. Just because he's buff doesn't mean he's a horrible person. Just because he's in this town doesn't mean that he's a horrible person. He's a relatively nice guy. Like, he's just a good guy who happens to be buff. Oh well, and like, no one has to cry about it and be like, no, he doesn't deserve her. Like, what the fuck? That's weird. But like,
why do they only go for nice guys like me?
and I wasn't like that when I was younger, but at the same time, though, I definitely would have scratched my head because, again, and John, you can help me out here. At the time, guys like that saturated the, anything like with a romance scene or dynamic, any kind of film, you would have a guy that looks very similar to him in the
Yeah,
role.
well, I think they were going for, yeah, he definitely is a very generic, white dude, handsome white dude love interest.
But
Um,
now, right? I mean, maybe it's just me. I feel like if you see a goth person on screen, they're with another goth person.
yeah, I mean, and people do sometimes it's two goth people. I know they do love the goth person and like pastel person or brightly colored
Well,
person
I don't. I
dichotomy.
I guess I don't. I feel like that's more of a online thing that people are pushing back on, like pastel, because opposites attract is starting to like now they're now it's coming from inside the house. People, some within the LGBTQ plus community, some outside the community, are just like no, pastel goth, pastel goth. But at the time, though, it felt like a very safe choice. I think it's just interesting how times shift and the context shift. In 1988, he was a very safe choice. Now I'm like, oh wow, actually this is pretty interesting and cool to see like this opposites attract working. And the fact that she doesn't turn him goth or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah, and,
just
and,
they
and that's
both
pretty
get
cool
to
too. That's pretty cool
exist.
too. Yeah, that's pretty cool too. That like a lot of times, especially where it's like a person who's like a free spirit and a person who's a little bit more reserved, like there's an attempt by one person to like change the other as far as that goes. And really, in this case, it was just like, yeah, she just, they just kind of enjoyed each other's company, and there wasn't an attempt. The goal wasn't to get him to be any particular way. Which again, he kind of was really just a love. He filled the role of love interest.
But it's
But
so interesting because like when you compare him to the villain, I feel like you could have just had more love interest stuff and less villain stuff. Oddly, I never thought I would have said that while watching a movie, especially an Elvira movie, but somehow their dynamic was so wholesome and it worked that you could have just had more of that and less of the villain because like I mean, what was he really doing? Like, he seemed like he was just like outside of when he was like, something fascinating. We used to burn witches here, and I love how everyone was like, in Massachusetts. I'm like, you fucking idiots, really? You're all conservative Christians, and you're like burning. Is that really on the law books? Like, come the fuck on. You all had that in your back pocket.
Burning in my town's bylaws?
I
It's more
don't know
likely than
about
you think.
it's more likely than you think. Um, but yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating that it wasn't just her as a horror host, but just horror hosts in general, how they took the nation by storm for as many years as they did. I mean, obviously, in a world without internet, it makes sense. But like, it's just, and I grew up without internet, of course, at least to the, what it is today. But it's just interesting. Like, and I know you weren't really watching the horror hosts. That was still a little bit before your time. You were a bit too young for them. But I just think it's interesting how many of them are a staple even to this day. I mean, even if you don't know her as the horror hostess, you know Elvira, Vincent Price. Even if you might not know him as like the horror host, you still know the name Vincent Price. Like, it's interesting how these actors and actresses and these characters have transcended, and even how what they do has transcended, like how they did it has transcended honestly into the online space. I don't know if you're, John, I don't know how much YouTube you watch, but like with the amount of YouTube that I watch, the fact that you have people not just saying, oh, I'm going to review a movie, but like reviewing it and also half making jokes about it and cutting in between the footage and doing it in a way that like really reminds me of the little bits that I have seen just in passing throughout the years of horror hosts, of course, of something like Mystery Science Theater 3000, of course, very influential, no shit. But it's just, I don't know, it's just fascinating that we're in the year 2022 and these, not just their style, but just the characters themselves are still this influential that we're talking about this movie in 2022. And outside of the fact that, don't get me wrong, there was some stuff that was dated, even just in the content, like when the two of them were sitting next to each other on the couch, Elvira and love interest, and then the two teenagers. And Elvira was like, isn't it getting late? And then the teenage kid, he didn't get it, but the other girl got it. She goes, yes, it is. It is getting late. We should leave.
Yeah.
And then when they left, they're watching some B movie, right? And then it cuts to a few hours later, God knows how many hours later, right? And they're watching the last broadcast of the night, which was a thing in the 80s before
Oh, and
my
the
time.
American flag, and the American flag comes on and
Yeah,
everything. Yeah.
that is so fucking dated. I mean, I don't like to be the person that says any Gen Zer, but like legit though, like there's no concept for that for a Gen
No.
Z. Even for me, there's no concept. I only knew about it from like watching a few movies in the 80s when I was much younger, in the 90s and 2000s myself, where the 80s was far back before my time, but not that far back. But there's no fucking concept for the last broadcast of the night. Here's the American flag.
That
Remember,
was kind of a
support
dated
America.
concept. I think that was still kind of getting to be kind of a dated concept even in the
Well,
late
well,
'80s.
that's what's really funny because
It was a
that's,
small town.
well, it was small town, but also like that's Elvira. Just the movie itself is just fascinating in that it's even just calling the idea of the sorry referencing the idea of a horror host and hostess. That itself was a dated concept by the 80s, and what Elvira was doing for it.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, and
Yeah.
oh, but also too, one thing is that I loved how a lot of the movies that she was like kind of riffs tracking, um, they were real B movies like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Oh, they were. I thought they made
Yeah.
them up for the movie
Oh no,
because.
no, those are some, and then you just
Oh,
saw bits and pieces of them, but there was Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which also got a Saturday morning cartoon adaptation that I
that's
remember
fucking
watching.
absurd.
And I think there was another one. I don't remember the exact name of it. I don't know if it was the creeping eye or something like that. There was another, but there was another
Oh.
like there were definitely like actual real movie horror
So
classics.
let me tell you why I didn't know that. Well, first of all, I knew that I know what Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is, but I haven't seen it or heard of it enough to like have it click. The reason why I didn't know is because so you and I watched the movie just like we watched other movies in the past for the podcast on Tubi. Is this an ad? No. Is our email those guys on the radio at gmail.com? Yes, Tubi, it is. But this is not an ad. But the point is, it's a free service that you and I use. It has ads freaking during the movie, so there's no paid tier anyway. But the point is, John, and everyone listening, is that the movie looked so clear. on my TV. Like they were clearly not using an old master of the film, like whatever new master, whatever company, I don't know, Shout Factory or whatever company that put out this Elvira film in the modern day. Clearly, they were using a better version of it. The movies looked so good, like it looked like those were like bad rips of the films that to me, I don't know how to explain it. Like I thought that it was just fake stuff made for the film because of how good the movies looked. Like in other words, you and I when we watched Universal Soldier, I think it was 3 or the
Mhm.
second one, they had stock footage in the movie that looked really bad of the White House or
Yeah, it was
something.
like Washington. It was like the Capitol building, and
The
so that was like
Capitol.
Washington D.C.
Yeah, the Capitol building. So it looked so bad that you go, okay, well, clearly this is stock footage. It's not, they didn't film it while filming the movie. They got stock footage, and that's why this looks so bad compared to the movie, which honestly, while those two movies, Universal Soldier 2 and 3, were bad, they looked good because of how they were mastered to be put on the service and on, DVD or whatever the fuck, right? So this movie looked so good to me, quality wise, that I legit thought that those were fake movies. That's funny.
Yeah, but no, those were and they look. The thing is, they look cheesy enough by today's standards that like you'd be like, oh, that's not a real movie that ever existed. But nope, nope,
Yeah.
that was a thing.
Well, like I love Toku, so like I've seen some cheesy B movie stuff. It very much looked like also cuz I think I've talked about this movie before. I think it's called oh, it's not Monster House. No, Monster House is a completely different movie. But there was a movie from the 80s, right? It was a vampire living next door. I forgot the name of it off the top of my head, but I really loved it, right? Vampire living next door. Kid doesn't know that he's a vampire, realizes it, and then has to convince people but can't. So then he has to basically fight a vampire and his familiar, not familiar, but his second in command essentially. With no help, almost no help whatsoever, outside of a horror host, a local horror host who doesn't believe in the stuff, but he's trying to get him to believe, right? The host was supposed to be Vincent Price, like actually really be him. They were gonna cast him, but he declined. So they named him something completely different as an ode to Vincent Price. And so I thought they were doing that here with the B movie. I thought it was just like, oh, this is an ode to B
Like a
movies,
tribute, yeah, or
a
like a parody.
tribute.
But sometimes some things you just can't parody them. I don't think it's possible to do a parody of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes when it's basically a parody of and unto itself.
Yes. By the way, though, so this movie again has a lot of heart. I would highly suggest you watch it. I think it has something for everyone. If you're not a big fan though of jokes about sex, then yeah, no, this movie's not gonna be for you at all. Don't watch the movie. Right? If you just don't like them at all, any jokes like that, definitely this is not the movie for you. But personally, I liked it because not only are those jokes funny to me, but the fact that most of the stuff was honestly coming from her. Like it was her. Like Elvira is a very powerful character, and it didn't feel like they were taking the power constantly away from her. She was the one that was making the jokes. Like one that killed me is when she was talking to the teenagers, trying to rally them to help her out to come to the late night movie that she's hosting. The midnight matinee, and she was like saying, well, I guess I'll die if you don't show up, right? And she was just like, but if I do, tell them that I would never turn away a friend.
Oh, that
Right?
big dramatic
Yes.
guilt trip. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I was just about to get to the punchline. Thank you. And she says, tell them I would never turn away a friend or a stranger for that matter." And I just fucking lost it.
Well, yeah, I loved it because the thing is, it was all very empowered. Like it was all
Yes.
kind of just very off the cuff. Like it wasn't even treated like, oh, it's a big deal that that she's saying these outrageously flirtatious and sexual things. Like it all comes very natural to her. And I think that's why I found myself surprised that she got like a Razzie because honestly, like in for portraying that type of persona, that somebody that's just very casually sexual, kind of like sex positive, and just plays it very naturally and very easily. I think that's actually where a lot of her talent is, and where a
Yeah,
lot of the strength of her performance is.
I agree. I just think that looking at it from the perspective, which I imagine that they had, looking at it from the perspective of, well, you have to be, you can't just be you can't act this way throughout the entire movie. And it's like, well, I understand that, but also like she is not meant to be phased in a way. It is not she's not meant to cry. She's not meant to like I think the idea is well she has to show range in how the character reacts to the things around her, which I get to a certain extent because I mean, yeah, but at the same time though, the whole point of the character is to be unfazed by and to be unchanged. Like maybe they wanted her to change or the guy to change and it's like, no, I think it's an interesting subversion to not
And
have that happen.
and it's the old be your it's the old be yourself message, but it's presented in a very cool kind of a cool way. So like I said, it may not be the most like complexly written or complexly conceived thing, but it just was it was just fun.
I
You know,
do want to say though, before we wrap this up, we got to talk about some controversy. Hit the controversy button. Apparently, there was some issues with a problematic actor on set. The co-star Binny, the temperamental poodle,
oh really?
who did not seem to like anyone except his trainer. And so, it's very interesting because I'm happy that they didn't use permanent dye on the dog's fur, so that's good.
Yeah.
Um, However, because they use vegetable dye mixture,
No animals were died during the making of this film.
yes. However, they had to use vegetable dye mixture and had to be touched up and reapplied daily. And again, the dog didn't like people, so that must have been very difficult. The dog also had trouble hitting its mark, and so apparently it did not perform properly and actually attacked Kurt Fuller's ankle,
He's
which
the most
sounds funny until you hear that it left him with long-lasting scars. Like what the
jeez.
fucking poodle?
Talk about your problematic co-star.
Yeah, fucking Jesus. And then and
What a
apparently
diva.
entire scenes had to be dubbed to mute the trainer's commands.
Oh boy.
So apparently, so you know what? That actually makes sense because there was one scene in the movie where they filmed the dog away from everyone else. And that makes a lot of sense because it was a quick shot after they filmed the house, after they painted the house, when they showed everyone standing there like, wow. And then they cut to the dog for like 3 seconds, literally.
Hmm.
That makes a ton of sense. I was like, the second I saw that, I was like, oh, they must have had trouble trying to get the dog to stand still. Didn't realize that the dog was like, actually, fuck all of you. Give me the best kibble. The dog is just like walking around in a bathrobe. The dog just did not leave the trailer like the entire time. No, but seriously though, I did not think that we would be ending this podcast on the dog was a dick. I didn't think we'd end it on that. And yeah, here we are.
The most problematic and dramatic co-star
Um,
of the bit.
I will say though, right before we wrap this up, a lot of actors that we knew, like not by name, I have to admit, but just by seeing them, I'm like, I've seen you in '80s shit. Like a lot of them had
Yeah,
played stingy adults before.
a lot of the people in the town look familiar, and also the main bad guy was played by W. Morgan Shepherd,
Huh?
who played a lot of like usually played like a spooky or like a creepy or like evil guy of some kind. And me being who I am, I mostly know him from Star Trek. He played the guy that was Data's grandfather,
Oh
or so he
wow.
called him. Was like the guy that taught the guy supposedly taught the guy that made Data everything he knows. And he was also one of the prison guards in for Rura Penthe in Star Trek Six.
Wow, this is absurd. He was in the Helsing anime. He played Peter Farguson, someone that I know as a character. I don't know him personally, but it's a character I know very well. That's absurd.
Yeah, and
Huh.
he's another one of those character actors that even if you don't know his name, you'd probably look at him and say, "Oh, it's that guy."
He was also in he was in an episode of Murder She Wrote. He was in Star Trek Voyager, like you said. He was in Star Trek. He was also in not only Wild Thornberries for an episode or a few episodes. He played Dum Dum Dugan, right? Marvel character, but not in anything you would maybe know him from. He was in a couple episodes of Iron Man, like the animated 1994 Iron Man.
Oh, yeah, I used to love that cartoon.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember the opening, the dang dang, but I never wanted to watch it. It's hilarious now that with how Marvel, the MCU, the cinematic universe, just completely changed up. At least how I viewed Iron Man, because at the time it was like, oh, I've already seen Spider Man, love that show. Oh, Iron Man, yeah, I'm gonna flip the channel to something else.
Prior to the Robert Downey Jr. version, that was really that cartoon was my like head canon, my official version of the official version of the show as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So he's been in a lot of stuff. It's so interesting. But anyway, so we are going to wrap this up. We want to wish you a happy Halloween in July. Hope you celebrated it well. It is the 31st, so hope you all had fun. Hope you all stay spooky and tune in next time for something completely different. I don't know who we will have on. I don't know what we will be talking about. But what I do know is You can find all of that down in the description box down below. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and you can find all of our updates there for all the podcasts that we are doing in the future, and hopefully get John back on, talk about some fun stuff. We might be talking about Universal Soldier again, but if we do, John, it'll be a good one. Maybe.
We can only hope.
We can only hope with that franchise. You kind of have to roll the
We've
dice.
banked enough goodwill. I think that we can have a good Universal Soldier as a treat.
Hopefully gonna roll the dice. So either way, hope y'all had fun. We definitely did. Definitely check out this movie. Love y'all. Take care and tune in next time. So see ya.
Adios.
Stay spooky.